This is your weekly podcast for Rocky's Rockin' Cruises and Adventures, bringing to you information about the greatest rock and roll cruises in the world. Hosted by Kathleen, Kane, and Rocky. I'm Kathleen Kane with Rocky's Rockin' Cruises and Adventures, and we are here with the founder and executive producer of Rockin the Caribbean, the best cruise on the planet.
That's
rock
right.
and roll cruise on the planet. And this is podcast episode 11. And we've been having so much fun. Just want to remind you, subscribe right up front. We've got a special guest on today, right?
We really do. Hi, Kathleen.
Hi.
Hello, everybody. How are you? We got he's my best friend
That's true.
in the world. I've known him for a long time. We've done a lot of shows together all over the world, and we've done them. We're partners in shows, and we produce and promote together, and we've just, I can't say enough about him. You know who's here today?
Who? I'm so excited.
Some guy.
No, stop. He's actually...
It's that guy.
He's got such great stories. I can't wait.
Bowzer.
Hey, come
John
on.
Bauman himself, Mr. Bowzer's here from, of course, Sha-Na-Na, and of course all the other Bowzer's Rock and Roll Party shows, and we're going to be talking with him about life, love, and happiness.
And so much more. Hey, John, how you doing? You look great.
Well, thanks, Kathleen. I feel pretty good
Smiling.
for a geezer.
A geezer? Oh no! Don't say that.
Don't go there. You're Bowzer. You're not a geezer.
Well, as we're talking here, I'm about to be 76, so I think that qualifies as geezer. I do have to confess that my son wrote a thing when he was about 10, and he codified the ages of people, and it kind of went like geezer was like 45.
Well, when you're 10, that's what you think.
It was so depressing. 'Cause, he was 10 years, Eli was 10 years old, so it was like
Right.
Fogey was, I think Fogey was like after geezer. Fogey was like 50.
So, John, we're here. We're going to be talking a little bit about the cruise and all, but I can't help because I've been to your home a few times in California, and I'm looking in your background at those pictures that you've taken. You love taking pictures of wildlife, don't you?
Yeah.
I do. That's my favorite thing. And as we speak, unfortunately, there's been a terrible disaster in Hawaii.
Oh, awful.
Right.
And you can see that I love the humpback whales actually over this shoulder. See, these guys are bubble net feeding, and this guy's breaching in Juneau. But they really breach the most in Hawaii. The most perfect picture that I've ever taken is actually in the other room here in my office, which was the most perfect breach with humpback breach with the island of Lanai behind it.
Wow,
And I
love
had left
Lanai.
from Lahaina on a raft.
Yeah.
That was on a raft.
Wow.
I nenever had to touch that picture. I didn't Photoshop it at all. These are basically pretty much untouched.
Yeah, they're
The
beautiful.
ones behind. Because I got to be pretty good at this after a while. There's a moose and a calf and this crazy bear.
Yeah, a little up close and personal, too, which is really, really neat.
Yeah, sometimes they're a little too up close and personal. It's like you don't go to them, but they can't control them when they come to you.
Yeah, that's a little scary.
You just have to know what to do. You have to know how to behave around wild animals. And so far, once again, as we said, I do qualify for being a geezer. I am 76, and I survived.
Well, John,
There you go.
talking about whales, we're talking about the cruise too. We did a cruise in Alaska called Rockin the Glaciers,
Yeah.
and you were the spearhead of this wonderful adventure we all went on, all the acts. We went to do some whale watching. And I remember John knows everybody in Alaska. He knows everything there is to know about whales pretty much. I really mean that. And we came up and this whale came, if you remember this, the whale came up right next to the boat. You could literally touch it.
Wow.
And just kind of hung there with us. And everybody was just, I remember Freddie Cannon going, oh, what's it doing? What's he doing? What, you know, I mean, it was the most unbelievable experience. You know, the bubble netting, the breaching. John knew everything there was to know about it. It was really
Yeah, I
fun.
could easily be a naturalist on a. That's what I did that day. You
Yeah.
know, on a whale
Yeah.
watch. I just went out and was the naturalist basically with Captain Larry, who was my
Captain Larry.
friend.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember Captain Larry.
I
Captain
wouldn't be too
Larry.
good at fixing the boat if something went wrong. I have to admit that too. You'd be much better at fixing the boat if
Yeah,
something
or driving the boat for that matter.
or driving the boat, right? But I could easily be the naturalist. Like I knew the entire spiel, you know, and you know, you just learn more and more as you go along because it's so fascinating. And the bubble net feeding, which is what's going on back here,
Yeah.
where these guys, that is one of nature's greatest spectacles.
It is.
In my opinion, it's nature's greatest spectacle.
Blew me away when the first time I saw it. I couldn't believe
Yeah,
it.
it's just crazy that these normally solitary animals actually get together for this lunch date.
Right.
Yeah.
And
they
do it
figure
together.
out this entire procedure where one whale is in charge, and it's always a female, and it's almost always a pregnant female.
Yeah.
Blows bubbles and underwater that kind of freezes a group of herring. You know, and that's why it's called bubble net, because these bubbles, no one knows whether the herring aren't too bright. We're pretty sure of that.
They just hang out and go, okay, we'll hang out here in
They're
the
just
bubble.
kind of stunned by this net of bubbles, where if they're only bubbles, they could actually like swim through them, but they don't. They stay in this net of bubbles instead, and then some kind of enormous group of enormous whales. In this case, was probably about a group of 14 or so that's behind me. You know, just comes up from below and gobbles up as many herring as they possibly can. And the pregnant female comes up the highest in the middle. She's the one in the middle there, and they're usually in this sort of pyramid pattern. It's just amazing how this and we have also seen it, which is just as interesting when you've seen bubble netting as much as I have. We've seen it where the group of whales gets together and just swims around because they don't have the dominant female leader.
And they're not quite sure what to do.
Trying to bubble net, but they don't know how to do it.
Right. Interesting.
That's crazy.
And it just never happens. So it's also a very interesting experience in leadership and how important leadership is, and how important experience is.
I mean, Rockin the
Our shows are good because
we should start doing Rockin the Glaciers again, just so we could go see whales
see the bubble netting. I'd love to see that in person. You know, John, you have you just have so many interests. You have so many loves. You have so many hobbies. You know, we were talking about this a little bit ago about your background, and you're also a wonderful piano player. I mean, you were piano prodigy, as Rocky would say.
Rocky's going a little too far on that one.
Okay.
But I did get into, you know, I started playing the piano when I was 7. I got into the Juilliard School of Music preparatory division. You know, I was lucky I was in New York. I grew up in New York.
Right.
As far as being a prodigy is concerned, my Juilliard experience partly convinced me that I was never going to be a concert pianist.
Oh, okay.
And I'm not. You know, that's a whole other life's work. And, you know, I was pretty good for a kid. I will never forget the first recital it was all the kids who studied with my piano teacher, this guy, Harry Knox. And it was like on a Sunday, we all got together for this recital. And, you know, it's the first time you're hearing other kids at Juilliard Preparatory Division play. And I just was sitting there thinking like, oh, that kid's pretty good. And the next was like, that kid's really good. The fourth kid, you're going like, what am I doing here? You know, because there were some serious contenders. You know, I think a couple of those kids probably did become actual concert artists, which is no mean feat.
Yeah.
Sure.
So
We're
you're in Columbia
rock.
University, right? You're going to college, you're doing your thing, and then what happens there?
Oh, well, yeah, it was a little confusing. It was the late 60s, and there was a lot of turmoil on the campus. And the year after the big turmoil, I had actually graduated, but I was still living, you know, right around the campus on the Upper West Side of New York. And a lot of these guys that I knew, well, I knew a few of them. They were in this thing called the Columbia University Kingsmen, not to be confused with the Kingsmen who sang Louie Louie.
Right.
These guys started out as they stood around in a semicircle and wore blue blazers and gray slacks and sang college songs like, "Oh, I Love the Halls of Ivy." And believe me, in the late 60s, people couldn't have cared less about this repertoire.
Right.
So they got this idea to take a look back at the music of the 50s and the early 60s. And this was just 1969. You know, this was not that long after, but it's after the music had come out, but it seemed like a gazillion years ago.
True.
And especially the songs like Teen Angel and Tell Laura for these songs that were, you know, such pure innocence of the 50s and the early 60s. By the late 60s, they seemed like they were coming from another lifetime. And so this idea morphed into the Columbia University Kingsmen became Sha Na Na, and were the first group it began, in essence, the rock and roll revival.
True.
What came to be the nostalgia craze or the rock and roll revival. And it all started at Columbia. It all happened partly because one guy, this guy, Dave Garrett's father, knew Nat Lefkowitz at the William Morris Agency. And the very first show, the second show, the first show was at the Lion's Den, which was the student cafeteria. The second show was on South Field and was called Grease Under the Stars. And it was in the spring of 1969. And, you know, a lot of students were out there, a lot of kids were out there. It had a big crowd. And the William Morris Agency came down and said, "Hey, I think there's something to this," and signed the group, and the rest is kind of history.
Yeah. So you started in the 70s really is when you started doing the television shows. I remember seeing you like on, I think, Flip Wilson and all these other television shows as special guests. Then you started doing your own specials.
Right. Well, Flip Wilson, actually, one of the first TV shows that I did was in 1970. You know, we were on sort of the variety circuit. I'll never forget that one because we flew out to California for the first time. You know, I'd never been to California. We landed in Burbank Airport. You know, we were going to NBC to do the Flip Wilson show. And the first person that I ever met in California was a guy sweeping in the Burbank Airport who was wearing like a Hawaiian shirt, like a flowery shirt. And he saw the guitars coming out on the baggage claim, you know, for our group. And the guy sweeps over to me. He says, "You guys a band?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "You know, I write music." He's sweeping. I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, you ever hear 'Fly Me to the Moon'? I wrote that."
No.
Seriously, this was my first experience ever in Hollywood was this like crazy guy sweeping in the airport who claimed that he said he wrote "Fly Me to the Moon," "Moon River." Would I like to hear any of his songs? And, you know, it was like your typical experience in Hollywood that you always heard about where everybody's trying to sell you something.
Right. You want to buy it?
But it didn't work. It didn't work because I had no clout. I was Bowzer, but nobody knew it.
Nobody knew it yet, right?
Right. Nobody knew it yet.
What made
and did a lot of TV. I mean, Rocky, you know this. We built ourselves up. We built a career. Sha Na Na built a career out of really good live shows.
Yeah.
You know, that's what we had. We were entertaining. It was at a time when, I fear to say, there wasn't that much show business in rock and roll shows. We gained a lot of our reputation in the early years I will never forget, for instance, the show in San Francisco at Winterland where we opened for the Jefferson Airplane. And, it's not that they weren't good. They were terrific. They sounded just like the album.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think anyone moved more than 6 inches during the entire
right.
show.
There was no
Grace
choreography with Grace Slick and, the rest of it.
Right.
Right. There was Yorma he was a great guitar player, but he was just basically trying to stand up through the entire show.
Right.
And we had come out to begin with, it was their audience. And we were this 3-ring circus of movement, of choreography and fun, and the guys in the gold suits, and I'm being Bowzer and this and that, and the Jefferson Airplane audience in the early 70s is sitting there going like,
So I'm curious, how did you come up with the name? Sorry.
Wow, this is great. Let me tell you this one.
Okay.
Kathleen, Rocky's heard this one.
Okay.
We did a show in Calgary. This train went across Canada, and we met it in Calgary. And it was a 2-day festival. There's a movie out called Festival Express that has us in it very briefly from like 1970 again. And I will never forget, the Grateful Dead had done their show the day before, and then they came to see our show the next day. And, they didn't have anything to do that day, which probably didn't make any difference. They're probably somewhat like this all the time. But they came backstage after our show, and I will never forget Jerry Garcia coming up to me and saying, and I quote, "Wow, that was the greatest show I ever saw. You had those gold suits and you were jumping. And the colors, they were flashing." And I thought to myself, as a Columbia student from the late 60s, wow, this is Jerry Garcia reviewing the Sha Na Na show on some substance. I don't know quite what, but it is really interesting. And that's kind of what happened in our early 70s incarnation.
Mm-hmm.
So we were the opening act for a lot of people who then, went on, who we were a terrible opening act. The Jefferson Airplane story I just told you, and we got along with them great. We were both William Morris Agency clients.
Mm-hmm.
And one piece of feedback that we did get was from our agent was the airplane said, "Thank you very much for putting Sha Na Na on our show as our opening act. Please don't ever do that again."
That's right.
And they never did, because we're a terrible opening act for, in the way that our show was much more active, much more alive, and, it was a real show.
Right.
And nobody wants to get blown away by their opening act.
Exactly. Right.
So as this progressed, I mean, you were approached by, of course, the movie Grease, approached you guys to be in it. And then when did the television show, the Sha Na Na television show actually?
Right, the TV show came first.
So,
right. So what really happened was we built up this reputation, by being a really dynamic live show. Then we, starting as an opening act and then becoming headliners ultimately. And then, like I said earlier, we had kind of kicked off this thing called the nostalgia craze or the rock and roll revival. There were also the Richard Nader shows at Madison Square Garden were happening at the same time. There were other things happening, but we were the very beginning of all of it. Ultimately, those led, as everyone knows, to a lot of interest in the 50s and TV shows like Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley, which were number 1 and number 2. Okay, at that point in the mid 70s, we had a big reputation as a band. Those shows were out of sight as far as pop culture was concerned. They were the biggest things going. So naturally, people in the television world were looking around for, hey, what can we do that's like that? Can we find something else that's like that? And then Pierre Cossette, who was the executive producer of the Grammys at that time, and got together with a TV syndicator, and they came to us with the idea of doing a musical variety show, a half-hour show aimed at like 7:30 prime access time. And we did a pilot. I think the pilot did better than anybody ever dreamed it was going to when it aired. And lo and behold, all of a sudden we had our own TV show.
Yeah.
It went on for 4 years, about 100 episodes. It's 97 episodes. And then went into strip syndication, meaning it was on 5 days a week for a few years after that. And that was really the biggest success that Sean and I ever had, was the TV show.
Yeah.
During the time period of the TV show, we were asked to be in the movie Grease, because we already had a hit TV show and we were another good name to put on the marquee.
Right.
And Alan Carr, the producer who had optioned the stage show Grease, knew a good name to put on the marquee when he saw one.
Sure. So all that led to you eventually leaving Sha Na Na.
When I felt we had done everything we were going to do together as a group. We already had our own TV show. We were in this movie that became the biggest selling soundtrack album of all time, and we had 6 songs on. We had approximately 1/4 of the biggest selling soundtrack album of all time. And then our show ultimately got canceled when they got to 100 shows, which is enough to put on 5 days a week.
Right.
And then I just felt, okay, we're just going to be doing this forever, which, wouldn't have been horrible. But, I was also the first person in the group to have kids. And I wasn't keen on the idea of traveling to the extent that we had been traveling.
Right.
It
takes its toll on a family.
Sure does.
Going back on tour and never being home.
Right.
So I got an offer to host a game show for Mark Goodson, which was a combination of 2 classic game shows. It was called the Match Game Hollywood Squares Hour, and that was in 1983. And I felt like in Sean and I think we'd accomplished everything we were going to accomplish together. This was an opportunity to stay home, with the family, and I left the group at that point, and then didn't do the Bowzer character for a few years. I did Match Game Hollywood Squares Hour, but that got canceled. Then I did, I was on VH1 as an original VJ for a couple of years. And, there's a downside too to going from job to job to job and constantly having to find one. And in 1987, as you know, Rocky, because you ultimately were there,
Yep.
I decided, what, the Bowzer character was really fun, and I own it. So I think I'm going to start doing it again. And I'll start by hosting some shows and see how that goes. And ultimately, I got this show in Atlantic City, put together a new group for it called Bowzer and the Stingrays, and took the whole family out to New Jersey. We spent the entire summer. It was the most successful, 1987, it was the most successful show in the history of the Trop world now. It was then called Tropicana Hotel and Casino, and forever will be.
Yeah, that was one of the greatest shows I was ever involved in.
It was so much fun.
Yeah.
And Rocky came with Danny and the Juniors, was the drummer at that time for Joe Terry and Frank Buffet and Danny and the Juniors, and came as as one of the guest acts. We had 2 guest acts a week. And people were lined up around the block for this show. And it got extended until New Year's Eve.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, that was really a good return to doing Bowzer. And that allowed me to just continue to do Bowzer in a way that I was making my own schedule.
Right.
I didn't have 11 partners like we had in Sha Na Na. Now I was making my own schedule and could be home more, and made sure that I was around to... I could never be I was away too much to be the coach of the T-ball teams or the Little League teams, but I was always the assistant coach.
That's great.
You know, we're working up now to, you know, my relationship with Bowzer and John. And for all these years, you know, we've done a lot of shows together all over the world for that matter. And it's been, I think probably the highlight of my career has been working with you, John, as your drummer and kind of musical director and doing all the shows that we did, the bus tours. I've learned so much about the music business from him that you don't realize, because, you know, John would sit down and talk to me about things.
He says you're the smartest guy he knows.
Oh,
That's your thing that he says all the
we'll have to
time.
introduce Jerry to some more people.
Yeah,
Where did you come up with the Bowzer character? Where did you come up with that name? I've always wondered that.
Oh, the name was easy. The name the name is really a derivative of John Bauman, of my last name.
Uh-huh.
You know, Bowzer was a nickname I kind of had as a kid, and I attached it to the character.
Okay.
Where the character came from is I think a more interesting question, you know, a more interesting story.
Uh-huh.
Because when I started doing Sha Na Na, I determined for myself, okay, I'm really going to take a look at the greaser of the 50s through the eyes of the early 70s. And I would argue that I was really kind of the first person to really do that, you know, in this Bowzer character. And the Bowzer character he wasn't, you know, sort of the funny, crusty but vulnerable greaser that he later became, especially for TV. You know, he was rough in the early days. You know, and there was an element of spoofiness to the character, but I really meant him to be he was a tough guy, you know, especially in the pre-TV show days. And that partly came from that I was painfully skinny at that time. You know, I weighed like about 130 pounds.
Wow.
And I was 6'2".
Wow.
And, you know, I was one of those kids that would be the object of the greaser, aggression in the 50s.
Right.
You know, I was more you know, I always had this question like, would the Fonz and Richie Cunningham really have had that relationship? Because more likely the Fonz would have been bullying Richie Cunningham. You know, so I took, I think, a realistic look at that greaser, and I came out. There was one guy that I used to go to Alley Pond Park with my friends Irwin and Carl, and after school, Irwin, who was very strong left-handed batter, would hit huge fly balls to me and Carl, and we loved to field, so we would run around and catch fly balls until, Jerry, I know you're familiar with this, until it was so dark that you could see Irwin swing really far away, and the next thing you did was put your hands on your head because you had no idea where the ball was, and you were about to be killed. And then we would leave the park. That's how we knew it was time to leave the park. And this one night we left the park and we were surrounded by this group of, basically a gang of guys who were humongous. And there was one little renty guy who wore a jersey that said number 73. And to me, he's always been known as number 73. And number 73 was the spokesperson. And he said something really articulate like, "Give us your money and we'll beat the living blank out of you."
I knew that was coming.
Yeah. So we had like $2 between us, and we gave them all our money, and they beat the living blank out of us anyway, because that's kind of what you did. And number 73 was actually the prototype for the Bowzer character, because when I got in Sha Na Na, I had these 11 other guys around me, and I was tall, but, you know, and I was a good athlete, but I was painfully skinny. So I turned number 73 into the Bowzer character. I turned number 73 into my fan. Not that I ever saw him again.
Really?
Well, I guarantee you,
Yeah.
I
Probably watch
guarantee you
Sha
that
Na
guy
Na
was
every week.
Yeah.
that guy was somebody who watched Sha Na Na every week and said, "I love that guy. That guy's just like me." And I came out and I would, flex my non-existent bicep, and it became a thing.
It
And
did.
I guess in an oddball way, I got sort of revenge on
Yeah.
The greasers.
all the greasers that harassed me on my way to Juilliard and tried to kick my Juilliard books down the sewer at the bus stop.
Crazy.
But there's more to it than that. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you bring the character Bowzer, of course, on Rockin' the Caribbean every year, and I think, are the only act that's been on every cruise that we've done.
I think so.
Yeah, I think now that Johnny Tillison, of course, and Freddie Cannon, they're not on the cruise much anymore. You've been on all the cruises we've done for all these years, and I got to tell you, John, Bowzer's Rock and Roll Party, the show itself, is a highlight of the week. I think.
Sure is.
For not just the guests, but all the artists too that are the guest artists we have. They love to come and watch that show.
Yeah.
It's like you said, to quote Jerry Garcia, there's all this jumping and this colors and this.
And the stingrays. Just gotta love the stingrays.
And of course, we bring Johnny Cantardo comes
Right.
with us, and
And that's so much fun for me.
yeah,
He
because
still has his
because
beautiful
these kinds of
voice.
relationships.
Yeah.
And we didn't even cover it before, and we really should have. It was a big. It really was a big change in the way Bowzer and the Stingrays and Bowzer's Rock and Roll Party functioned and were fun to do when I met you in the early 90s. Before that, we'd been using various bands in various places. And then when Rocky and I started this relationship, which was really over all those firefighter shows.
the shows,
right?
that we did before, sure.
Right, these big runs of police and firefighter shows that we were doing all over the country. And only a band like yours could have possibly done. I mean, honestly, only you could have possibly done those. So we developed this relationship where we just did all our shows together. I couldn't possibly function with another band once we started doing that.
Yeah, I remember when we first started doing a lot of those shows in the 90s for the firefighters and the sheriffs, and we literally saw every town in every state in this country we performed in. And I cherish this till today. We started a friendship that, to me, is you are my best friend. I mean,
that's the thing that happened, was that it became, the personal relationship, grew as the professional relationship grew.
Yeah.
But there was nothing like that before. It was really like having.
Yeah, well, we were doing shows and all, but I think when we started those bus tours, especially in the 90s, prior to that, it's you're a band, you're an act, but it's being on that bus for 6 weeks or 5 weeks.
That'll definitely bond you for sure.
We spent a lot of time together in the 90s, and that's what really, I think, developed our friendship and our professional relationship too, and I still think about those times, when we were in Utah and Montana, and those shows were so much fun to do, and
right.
Sold out coliseums. There was 10,000 people. We're in coliseums from city to city to city, and doing these shows. And they were just, we would of course do Bowzer's show, Bowzer and the Stingrays, but we would also back up 4 or 5 other acts that were on the show too. It was quite a tour, but it developed our relationship where when John will call me and say, I got this show wherever with all these acts like the Mohegan Sun and Casino,
right.
All these, and we're backing up
big ones.
all these acts.
Sure.
I got the show. It was great. It was a great relationship.
Because nobody else could do that.
Oh, I don't know about that, but
well, but it really was true because Rocky the Rollers, the entire time were the Tiffany. It was so funny, which I just want to revisit this for 1 second, was that somehow in that time period between like 87 when I started doing this and you were doing Danny and the Juniors, then I sort of lost track of you for a while. We didn't really know each other yet. And I was running around doing these shows into the early 90s where, you'd have a band here and a band there, regional band, this and that. And then it was Doris Jackson, who I came to understand later that we both loved. And speaking of which, I got to call Gloria Jones. I promised to do that. Who sang with Doris? So Doris was in the Shirelles, and she had her own group of Shirelles at this point. She is the woman who sang "Dedicated to the One I Love," which, when you think about it, was a completely different voice from most of the hits. Most of the hits were sung by Shirley Alston Reeves, who was also fabulous. But there was just so much talent in that group, and I loved Doris as a friend. She was probably my closest friend of any of the acts. And I also loved her as a talent. Because she was church. I mean, she would just come out and blow you away.
Yeah, she was church.
Singing was one of those, like, Shirley had the quality, had a recording quality, but Doris had like massive amount of skill. And one day, Doris Jackson started talking to me about Rocky and the Rollers, and I said, "Oh, I really haven't done anything with them." And she said, like, "Child," right away it was like, "You don't know Rocky and the Rollers?"
Aww.
And I said, "No, I just haven't. No, I've heard the name." She said, "They are the best." She said, "They are," because I think you were doing, you'd done a bunch of Jim Wagner dates,
Yep.
The North Carolina State Fair and that kind of stuff with Doris. And she started raving about Rocky and the Rollers to the point where, and I had so much respect for her. And that was the point where I said to myself, it's like, I got to see what Doris is talking about, because Doris always knows what she's talking about. And sure enough, when we did those first set of shows together, I immediately went like, okay, this is not just a cut above bands that are doing this. This is light years different from anybody else who's doing this, and that remains true today. And of course, you ultimately came into your own as your own self-contained act. Which was always great too. It was always great too. It's just gotten better and better and better as the years have gone on. But your ability to be both your own self-contained show that you guys just do, and to back up other people selflessly, sensitively, play all kinds of styles, be able to do a show where you were backing up, for the first person who comes into my mind is Leslie Gore, who sadly has left us, but, really hard charts to play, complex hard charts to play. And you were the only band that could ever, in my opinion, back up like a Leslie Gore with very hard charts to read and play, and a Freddie Cannon, which is just like straight out, balls to the wall rock and roll.
That's true. It is.
Yeah. Only Rocky
thank you, John. Thank you.
Do that.
Thank
the
you.
entire time.
And it's hard to believe still doing it after 48 years or whatever it is now. It's a little crazy. But
now we're all geezers.
No, we're all geezers. So,
I'm not moving around as well as I used to. I have to admit there, Rocky. I do the best to be jumping around and
you do, John Bowzer. You do great, and bringing your show to the cruise, you being part of this cruise, you've been a part of this thing since I started doing Rockin the Caribbean.
Yeah.
You've helped me through it. You've taught me a lot about the cruise industry because you were, a Royal Caribbean headliner for all those years, which helped a lot.
That helped.
It helped. I thank you for all that you've contributed to the success of Rockin the Caribbean, and now Rocky's Rockin' Cruises and Adventures, because it's really grown into this entity now that gets us all together every year, and for a week or two on a cruise ship. It really is.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it now as well. I had my first one this year, so next year will be my second.
Yeah, they're just a blast to be on.
Well, you're a great addition to it too, Kathleen.
Well, thank you.
But
Huge.
you're a big addition to it.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Last year when we finally got back out to do it
Yeah.
again, after a little bit of a hiatus because of COVID.
Right.
But that was very successful and really a lot of fun. And we all look forward to it. We all talk about it all year, about how much we look forward to it.
Yeah.
And once again, same kind of situation coming up. This one's going to a little bit different, couple of different places.
Yeah, it's going to
A
be
little longer, 1 day longer.
1 day longer, 8
day
days.
longer.
Yeah.
So
even some places that we never, all those years we worked at Royal Caribbean, we never went to.
Yeah. Puerto Plata is kind of a new port for them. So I'm kind of looking forward to that too.
That's new, so it makes it interesting, when you go someplace that you've never been to before.
Yeah.
And the cruises are fun because we get to spend time together with each other, and we get to spend time with the passengers, some of whom we know very well.
Oh yeah. We have quite a few that come on every year all these years. Well, thanks for joining us today, John.
Yeah, thank you, John.
On Rocky's Rockin' Cruising Adventures podcast, Rockin' the Caribbean. We look forward to seeing you on the cruise, as always.
All I can say is bum 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 dang 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 ding dong ding. Thank you.
Woo! I love it. Wow, he is awesome. I mean, yeah, he does that so good still.
He's had a little practice.
And that note he hit.
That note, I know. The note was like.
Awesome. And so many great stories.
He's got a million of them.
Yeah, I can't wait to see him on the cruise.
Yeah, I'll tell you, he's always there. Like when you go to breakfast, you go to the Windjammer for breakfast in the mornings, you go down for breakfast. There he is. I'll guarantee you there'll be a table at breakfast that'll have Bowzer, Vito Picone, Jay Siegel.
And one of the things, as he mentioned, he's really gotten to know some of the guests.
Yeah.
I mean, especially the ones that come back year after year. And it's always fun, too, to see the new fans out there.
Yeah. Well, we're kind of like this now. Everybody on, we bring a couple of new artists on every year. We keep bringing back a lot of the same artists because we're like family. I mean, we're just like this.
So the cruise is February 16th through the 24th. Got the extra day on Royal Caribbean. Adventure of the Seas 2024.
Can't wait. Gary Lewis and the Playboys.
Yeah. All the original recording artists, which is really neat. It's the actual ones who recorded the songs.
Yeah, Gary Lewis and the Playboys. This diamond ring doesn't shine for me anymore. Jay Siegel's Tokens are going to be there. Dennis Stefano, original lead singer of the Buckinghams. We got Lala Brooks, original lead singer of the Crystals. We got Joey D's coming with us. Vito Picone and the Elegants. We have, who else? Oh, yeah, Brian Hyland.
Yeah.
Bowzer and Johnny Quintardo from Sha Na Na also joins us on the cruise.
Right.
Singing all those great Sha Na Na stuff and the stuff from the movie Grease that they sang on.
And his beautiful voice.
And the lovely Kathleen Kane will be joining us again this year.
Yeah. That's right.
So I can't wait. And don't forget, Rocky and the Rollers.
Okay.
Who cares?
So make sure you subscribe to the YouTube. If you want to go on the cruise, you call AAA. That'll be up on the screen shortly.
Yes. Got to go to AAA Travel. Now, you could go to their website and click on the cruise and be able to kind of fill out online there. There'll be a link to that also that'll show you up on when we're done. And or you could call your local AAA agent or go to Rocky's Rockin' Cruises and Adventures.com website and get all the information you need for the best rock and roll cruise on the planet, and that's Rockin' the Caribbean.
Right. So stay tuned for another podcast episode from Rocky's Rockin' Cruises and Adventures.
See you later.
See you next time.
Bye.